All right, well, we are in the middle of this series, Tune My Heart, where we're looking at some of the great hymns of the faith, and we're allowing them to sort of point us to God's Word. And I don't know about you, but I've been loving this series. I don't know if I can say that since I picked it, but I will not sing some of these hymns the same again after looking at them in greater detail. But one of the side benefits of this series is that we get to remind ourselves why we sing. And if you were here a few weeks ago, one of the reasons we said why we sing is that when we sing, it allows us to say the same thing at the same time. It's really hard for a group of people to do that, but singing makes that possible. All week long, we all say whatever words we want. We pick them individually, but when we come here, we submit to each other. And we don't say our own words. We say common words together in song that rehearse the gospel, remind us of who God is and who we are. That's one of the reasons we sing, so we can say the same thing at the same time. But there's another reason we sing. You know, there's sort of a common view out there that the singing portion of our worship service is kind of like the appetizer before the main entree. You know, it's like that spinach artichoke dip that we like, but we don't really have to have it, right? It's you can take it or leave it. And there's sort of that view of the singing portion of the service. A friend of mine once was standing out in the church foyer, not here, but somewhere else, and he overheard a couple people talking, and they're talking before the service, and all of a sudden the music starts. And one of them says, "Hey, we got to get in, church has started." And the other guy said, "Well, church hasn't really started, they're still singing." I mean, that's sort of this view that the music is sort of the appetizer. It's sort of second priority. And you know, I know there's probably some in here that don't really get into all the singing. They want the deep theology. Probably some of the more left-brained among us. You know, keep all that music, all that flowery stuff. I'm here for the deep theology. Well, you know, Martin Luther would have something to say to you. Look at what Martin Luther says. He says, "The person who gives this some thought and yet does not regard music as a marvelous creation of God must be a clodhopper indeed. And he does not deserve to be called a human being. He should be permitted to hear nothing but the braying of osses and the grunting of hogs." You're allowed to say osses in church as long as you say it with a British accent. Now this is just classic Martin Luther, right? In your face. If you don't like music, you're not even fit to be a human being. Now listen, I'm not going to call anyone a clodhopper. That is just mean. But I do agree with his sort of point that music is absolutely essential to what we're doing here. Not only is music this unifying time where we can say things to each other, all using the same words and remind ourselves of truth, but another reason why we sing is that something happens to each of us during this portion of our worship service. There is significant heart recalibration that happens. Think about how you come in here. If you're like me, most of us live all week long, go, right? Our days are completely full. We hardly ever slow down at all. And if we do, it's probably with some sort of screen in front of us, and so there's still constant stimulation. Our focus is almost always on what's right in front of us. Then even think about this morning. Probably most of us had some sort of conflict at home before we even got here, right? Trying to get everyone up, get everyone fed, everyone dressed, out the door in time. Then probably someone cut you off in traffic. Probably had a hard time finding a parking spot. Even when you got in the door, you had to wait in line to check your kids in. Then finally we sort of waltz in here a few minutes after 10, and all of a sudden we want to flip a switch and say, "God, speak to me." It doesn't work like that. And this doesn't even take into account the whole idea of spiritual warfare. That there are forces that are literally hell-bent on trying to keep you from hearing from God. No, when we waltz in here, we're not ready to hear from God. No, it feels more like we're walking in on the middle of a movie or in the middle of a conversation. When we come in here, we need our souls to settle. Our hearts need to breathe a little bit. I don't know about you, but I need my heart to be stirred so that I actually desire God, so that I actually remember my need for Him. It's another reason why we sing, is for our souls to be stirred, so that our eyes can be lifted from just what's in front of us to the one who's beautiful, who loves us, But this takes time. It doesn't just happen like that. We need this 20 or 30 minutes to sort of stir our affections for him again, to get us ready to hear from him. So I want to throw out a challenge to us as a church. A few weeks ago, I threw out a challenge that we'd be a church that sings loud. And I don't know if you can notice, I have definitely noticed the last few weeks, people are singing loud, and I love it. But I've got another challenge. And my challenge is that we would really be a church that prioritizes this time of worshiping through music. You know, one of the things I've noticed about this church, but believe me, it's not just this church, every church I've been in, is that when 10 o'clock hits, there's like 10% of us in here, right? It looks like, well, what happened to everybody? And then by the time we sing a song or two, everybody's in here. Now that is quite common, but the problem with this is we are robbing from ourselves this important soul-stirring time that we all need to get ready to hear from God. So my challenge is to prioritize this time of worship. And this is going to look different for all of us, but to whatever is needed to sort of back the clocks up, start things a little bit earlier. No, it's going to take some time to get kids in classes, whatever it's going to take so that we can have that time for our souls to get quiet, for our souls to be reminded of who God is and who we are, and for that desire for God to be rekindled before we hear his word. And we'd be a church that prioritizes that time. That our eyes would be lifted off of what's right in front of us and on to God. That's my challenge. This idea of seeing God, that's really the theme of our hymn we're going to look at this morning. The hymn, it's printed on your worship guide, but we already sang it once, is the hymn, Be Thou My Vision. And I was really fascinated learning some about this hymn. The tune of this hymn comes from the 8th century out of Ireland. And the story sort of goes that St. Patrick, you know, we celebrate on St. Patrick's Day kind of, he was doing missionary work in Ireland, and he had sort of this confrontation with the King of Ireland. It was sort of this throwdown confrontation, and St. Patrick defied the king's orders, and yet the king was so sort of like struck by his courage that he didn't kill him like he probably could have. He, in fact, just let him continue his missionary work. And this tune was written sort of in commemoration of that event. 100 years later, in the 9th century, the words of this hymn were finally put to paper. But it wasn't for another 1,000 years that these words were finally translated into English. So this morning we're looking at a tune from the 8th century, words from the 9th century, all of which come out of the country of Ireland. But this hymn is a prayer, and it's a very simple prayer. It's a prayer, God, be my vision. Be my vision. Now, what is vision? Well, we all know what vision is. If you've ever studied organizational theory, vision is usually described as some sort of preferred future, some place that we want to go. But we can get a lot simpler than that. How many people have ever had some sort of eye exam? Okay, a vision exam. When you're standing in the doctor's office, he has you look at that chart and he says, what do you see? That's what vision is. What do you see? And the prayer of this hymn is, God, be what I see. Be how I see. Here's the first verse of the hymn that we sang. And I'll give you my paraphrase. My paraphrase for this, God, be the one that I see. You're the most important one in my life. Nothing and no one else matters. The best thing about my day is connecting to you. And it's your presence that guides me all day long. The big idea that I keep coming back to in this hymn is that what we fix our eyes on, it really matters. It makes the difference. What we fix our eyes on makes the difference of whether we'll continue on and we'll endure and we'll persevere or we'll give up. That's what makes the difference. It's what captivates our vision, what fills our imagination, what our eyes focus on. That's what makes the difference between will we endure or will we give up. And let me give you sort of an example of this from a completely different realm. I like to pretend I'm sort of a do-it-yourself kind of guy. There's most home projects I'll try to fix on my own, probably much to my wife's chagrin. Actually, one of the things that's been really helpful in our marriage, it's a principle she got from my mom, is that it's called the doubler principle. Every time I start a home project, she'll ask me, hey, how long do you think it's going to take? And whatever number I tell her, she doubles it. And that really has helped. It probably should be the tripler principle if we're really being honest. But it's really saved our marriage, I think. But anytime I get into a home project, the only reason I ever start is because there's something I see that could be better. There's some vision of something that could be more beautiful or more efficient or could work better. And so that's what gets into the project. Now, every single project I've ever gotten into, there's always a point in the project when I say, what have I done? I'll get some sort of snag or some sort of wrinkle or something that I didn't expect, and it's usually after I've completely made a huge mess and there's no turning back. And at that point, I'm ready to give up. But you know what keeps me going is that picture in my head of what it could look like at the end. That's the only thing that can keep me going. If I'm just looking at the mess in front of me and the thing that I can't figure out, I would be done right there. But it's the vision of what could be. That's what keeps it going. Now listen, if every home project has some sort of wrinkle or some sort of snag that I didn't anticipate, how much more is life like that? We all, as we go through life, we all face things that we never expected we were going to have to walk through. We didn't expect this situation to be that hard. And it's in those times, are we going to keep going or are we going to give up? When vision really matters, when what we see, what is it that fills our vision? What captivates our vision when we bump into something in life that's way harder than we ever thought? So do something for me. I need you to think of something in your life right now that's challenging. Something that's hard. And, the range is so broad on this. It's probably different from all of us. Maybe for some of us it's parenting and the exhaustion of sort of disciplining kids well and helping them to grow and mature. Maybe that's what's most challenging in your life right now. Maybe some it's dealing with aging parents. Maybe like the Weisties or in other ways it's something medically related that all of a sudden just is in your life. It's this new wrinkle that you didn't expect, and now you're supposed to sort of deal with it. But there's this tension of enduring or just giving up. Like, what is it for you right now that you're sort of struggling with? And it may be huge, it may be something small, but it's something that you're facing. The prayer of this hymn, and often it's a desperate prayer, is, God, fill up my vision. All I see right now is this thing that's right in front of me that I wish wasn't there, but I want to see you instead. And it's often a very desperate prayer. And listen, this isn't a prayer that says, God, I want to see you, and I want to just sort of ignore my reality. It's not like we want to put on these horse blinders that sort of block out what's difficult. No, this is a prayer that says, God, I need a different lens. I need to see things from a different perspective. I need to realize there's probably more going on here. So it changes the way I look at what I'm facing. It's kind of what Paul wrote in this prayer in 2 Corinthians. Not his prayer. This is sort of what he was talking about. He says, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Do you hear the irony in that? We fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Now listen, he calls them light and momentary, but Paul and his companions, what they were facing is anything but light and momentary. They faced imprisonment, they faced beatings, they faced death threats. And yet by fixing his vision on God, he's able to somehow look at those things with a perspective and call them light and momentary. And so what this hymn is asking for is not divine ignorance. This hymn is a prayer asking for divine guidance through whatever we're facing. Now there's another song in Scripture that actually is very similar to the song we're looking at this morning. It comes out of the book of Psalms, and it really follows this hymn pretty closely. So I want us to take a look at it. If you have your Bibles, let's turn to Psalm 73. Psalm 73. It's one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture. It's the Psalm of Asaph. Now, we don't know a lot about Asaph. What we do know from this psalm is that he was going through some pretty hard times. That becomes pretty clear. In fact, that's actually how he starts his song. He starts talking about what he sees when he doesn't see God. What life is like when God is not a part of your vision at all, which is honestly where most of us start. When we face something hard, we sort of tunnel vision on whatever's challenging in front of us. And that's where we usually start. That's exactly where he starts. So let's just look at the first bit of this. We're going to eventually go through the whole psalm, but just the first few verses. Listen to his perspective when God's really not in the picture at all. Verse 1, he says, "Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart." Now you'd sort of expect a psalm to start that way. But listen to his sort of honest confession. He says, "But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from common burdens. They are not plagued by human ills." He looks at sort of the wicked people around him, people who are living however they want to live, and life is going a lot better for them than it is for Asaph. And he's jealous. He's envious. He says, they're healthy, they're rich, they're prosperous, and here I am trying to follow God, and it's not working out for me. Listen to how these people are living. He says, "Therefore pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limits. They scoff. They speak with malice. With arrogance they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore their people turn to them, and they drink up waters in abundance." He says they're living ruthless, wicked lives, and yet they are popular. People are running to them. Then he goes to say some of what they're saying with their mouths. Verse 11, they say, "How would God know? Does the Most High know anything?" This is what the wicked are like. Always free of care, they go on amassing wealth. "Surely, in vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence. All day long I have been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments." Asaph's in a pretty dark place. He's not only envious of the wicked, he's regretting the way he's lived his life. He's sort of regretting, man, God, I've been following you, but it hasn't gotten me anywhere. I wish I had been like them. People who just lived however they want, because they're so much better off. I mean, left to his own vision, left to our own vision, we're only going to see what's right in front of us. And all he can see is envy and regret. I mean, left to our own vision, we're only going to live for what we think is going to make us most happy. In fact, that's the most common way that we'll waste our lives. Because when we don't have a vision for God, our vision is always going to be for what's temporary, for what's short term. But Asaph's about to have a vision change in the next few verses. And it's a very similar vision change that we're asking for in our hymn, "Be Thou My Vision." The entire hymn sort of pivots on the next couple verses. Look at it. Verse 15. "If I had spoken out like that, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their final destiny. Surely you placed them on slippery ground. You cast them down in ruins. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. They are like a dream when one awakes. When you arise, Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you." Now, what changed? I mean, the first 14 verses to these verses, what changed? Nothing changed in his circumstances. His life was still going as poorly as it was before. The wicked's lives were still going as prosperously as they were before. But what changed for Asaph? His vision changed. It says he walked into the sanctuary of God. His eyes got lifted off of just what was in front of him and got lifted onto the Creator himself. It's like he got a 30,000-foot view of his situation. It's almost like he got divine LASIK eye surgery. He goes into the presence of God and he's envious and he's regretting how he's lived his life, and he comes out of the presence of God with this whole new lens to look at what's happening around him. He says, I see the end of the wicked. All that riches, all that comfort that they've been living for, it's not going to satisfy the way they think it will. God fills his vision and everything changes. Now it's really interesting. The rest of Psalm 73 and the last 3 verses of our hymn almost match up perfectly. And what they do is they sort of flesh out, what does it look like when God's our vision? Because that's the real question, right? I mean, we can say, yeah, we want God to be our vision, but that's sort of a nebulous idea. What does that even mean? What does that look like when we're actually doing that? And the rest of Psalm 73 and the rest of our hymns sort of flesh out what that looks like in life. And the first thing that looks like when God is our vision is that we have an awareness of his presence. There's sort of a consciousness to the fact that God is with us all the time. Let me just show you in Psalm 73, verse 23 and 24. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you take me into your glory. I mean, that is such descriptive language. He says always. That there's never a situation when you and I are by ourselves. It feels like that, but that's not the case. And you remember in Psalm 139 when David, he's sort of overcome by the fact that he's never alone. He says, God, where can I go from your presence? If I go to the far end of the sea, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there. Everywhere I go, you are with me. And that is what happens when our vision is corrected, is we are aware of the fact that God is always with us. He's available. But we're not often aware of it. So when our vision is fixed, we're sort of conscious of that fact again. That we will never, ever be alone. It says, you hold me by my right hand. I mean, that is such an intimate picture. I mean, for those of you who are parents, when do we grab our kids' hands? Right before a dangerous situation, right? You're going to cross a street, you're going to go into a parking lot. That's when we grab our kids' hands so that they'll be safe through it. He says, you hold me by my right hand. And that is such a loving, protective, parental gesture. And whenever you and I are going into a dangerous situation, God grabs us by the hand and says, I'm going to walk you through it. And look at the second verse of our hymn. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word. And listen to these last 3 lines about God's presence. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, and I thy true Son, thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. Do you hear the awareness of God's presence? That no matter what we're sort of looking at, what's right in front of us, that God's with us in that. And that actually matters. That makes a difference. Have you ever had an experience where you really felt God was with you? Last week, Joel shared in his story when he was in the middle of an African rural airport and he was really sort of scared about what was going to happen, and he had this awareness that God was with him. It was really powerful. This past February, some of my college friends were planning sort of a reunion sort of weekend, and I really didn't think I should go. I didn't think I could afford the time. I didn't really think I could afford the expense to go on it. But I ended up going. And on that weekend, God really refreshed me in a powerful way. So powerfully that afterwards I realized I couldn't have afforded not to go. And yet, it was just as if God took me by the hand and said, you really need to be here for what I'm going to do in your life through it. What are you facing right now? What came to mind when I was asking you what's challenging in front of you? Is there that awareness that in what you're facing, God is right there with you? Because as God fills our vision, one of the things that happens is there's this awareness of his presence that really matters. That's the first thing that happens. another thing that happens when our eyes are lifted is that our values get reoriented. That God returns to his rightful place as our highest treasure. Let me show you this with Asaph in Psalm 73. Asaph, remember, he's looking at the wicked. All he's seeing is their prosperity. He's seeing their comfort. He's seeing how their lives are stress-free. And those things are treasures to him. He sort of envies them. He wants those. Those things have kind of risen to the top as treasures in his life. And then his vision gets corrected. And listen to how his treasure changes. Verses 25 and 26. These are fantastic verses. He says, "Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you." All that comfort, all that riches, all that prosperity, he says that doesn't matter to me anymore. My vision's been changed. Earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. You know, we run to a lot of substitute treasures. Money, power, reputation, titles, possessions. They're substitutes and they'll always let us down. But we don't realize that when our vision's focused on them. The hymn, the first line of the hymn kind of captures it in one line. It says, "Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise." In one line, it captures the large majority of probably what our substitutes are for our treasures. Riches, man's approval. I mean, there is a whole, those are the two most universal vision killers right there. In one line. When God's not my treasure, you know what probably is? Riches or man's approval. Let's talk about man's approval first. Have you ever lived to please other people? Have you ever gained someone else's approval? I have. Actually, confession time. I am a recovering people pleaser. Really, I've spent most of my life in any situation. I can read what the other person wants, and I know how to make them happy. And I've been recovering from that because it is a very fleeting end goal. If that's your highest treasure, it doesn't last very long. Because it doesn't take very long before there's one more expectation or there's one more person to please. And you just run from pleasing person to pleasing person. You're not free, you're in slavery. Riches are much the same way. And yet it doesn't often feel like that because you can actually hold on to your riches and you can put them in your bank account and it can kind of feel like you have control over it. But if you talk to anyone who's actually attained riches, they'll tell you they don't satisfy. At best, it's short term. And so that's what Psalm 73 and this third verse of the hymn state, that when our vision is corrected, our values get shifted and our eyes go back on our true treasure. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. But you, God, you're my inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only, first in my heart, high King of heaven, my treasure thou art. God, you're my treasure. You're what I long for. That's what that shift happens when our eyes get lifted off of just what's seen and onto him who's unseen. And what I love about this is what motivates our faith. That God's our treasure. You remember that story Jesus told? He said the kingdom of heaven is like a man who walks through a field and he sort of stumbles over a box and he digs it up and he realizes it's a chest full of treasure. And he goes and sells everything else he has to buy that field with joy. Our faith is motivated not out of guilt and not out of fear. No, our faith is motivated because God is our highest treasure. He's the thing that satisfies us the most. We've tried everything else. And nothing satisfies the way he does. That's what motivates our faith. I think people on the outside look at Christians and they often think we're motivated by fear or by guilt or by pressure. It's not it at all. God is our treasure when we seek him with joy. When God fills our vision, when our vision sort of is lifted off of what's in front of us and onto him, there's an awareness of his presence and our values get reoriented so he's our treasure. The last thing that happens, and it's really connected to those first two, is that hope returns in whatever situation we're in. Remember Asaph's situation. He's looking around him and he's despairing. You know, that started off, he said, my feet almost slipped. I had almost stumbled. You get this sense he's discouraged, he's depressed, he's about to call it quits. But listen to sort of the end of this passage and sort of the change of heart. You can hear hope in these lines. Verse 27, 28. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds. Some of the translations say, the nearness of my God is my good. His situation didn't change at all. But what changed is now there's hope. Now in his situation, he's aware that God's with him. His highest treasure he could ever want is with him. So he can actually face what's right in front of him. There's hope in the middle of it. That there's actually a bright future. No matter how hard whatever he's currently facing, there's actually a bright future beyond it. He may not experience it in this life, but it's still coming. Listen to the hope in the last verse of our hymn. It says, High King of Heaven, my victory won. Look into the end. May I reach heaven's joys, O bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, whatever happens, still be my vision, O ruler of all. No matter how bleak things look. As Joel shared about Ted in his prayer is that God would still be his dwelling. No matter how bleak the future looks, there is a bright future for every follower of Jesus Christ. It can give hope. You can put up the next slide. This is what it looks like when God fills our vision. There's this awareness of God's presence. God returns to the unrivaled place as our highest treasure, and there's hope no matter what we're facing. A number of years ago, I got my motorcycle license. And it's actually kind of funny because I was dating Jen at the time. I got my motorcycle license, and then a month later we got engaged, and I realized I didn't want to die. And so I didn't ride my motorcycle hardly ever after that. But as I was taking this class on how to ride a motorcycle, they sort of gave a principle in riding a motorcycle that wherever your eyes look is where the bike's going to go. And they sort of say, like, hey, as you're coming up on a turn, if your eyes are just looking at the guardrail, and you're like, I'm going to hit that guardrail, and all you're looking at is that guardrail, you will hit that guardrail. But instead, if you sort of look beyond it and sort of see where you want to go, then the bike will go that way. And I've never really forgotten that, but that's exactly what Psalm 73 and our hymn are really saying. They're saying, fix your eyes on where you're headed. Not on what's seen, but on what is unseen. And that's not going to make our problems go away, but it's going to make us view life's challenges differently, give us a new hope to endure them, because there'll be this awareness that God is with us as we go through. So friends, I don't know what you're facing today. I mean, I'm facing challenges just like you are. But would our prayer be that God would lift up our heads, that our heads would be fixed on Him, we'd be reminded of His presence. He'd be our treasure. Nothing else on earth would satisfy. And then we'd move forward in hope. I'm going to pray for us. We're going to sing this song one more time, and then we'll be finished.